Okay, so are humans still evolving right now? Are we going through evolution? Are we getting smarter and better and more fit? Are we going through survival of the fittest? Are only the fittest surviving right now? Question. Okay, so there are 5 things that need to happen to have evolution to have survival of the fittest. So first of all, you need to have overproduction. There needs to be too many of you so that only the fit will survive. Like if there's enough room and food and resources for everyone, then everyone's going to survive, and you're not going to have like just the fittest survive. Okay, so one thing you need for evolution, for survival of the fittest to happen, those 2 things go together. Evolution happens as only the fit survive. You need to have too many. So, for example, bunnies reproduce like crazy. Rabbits, a single female can have 18 to 30 rabbits a year alone. So, when you see, like I know in my neighborhood, we have bunnies everywhere. They are definitely overpopulated. So they will definitely have competition, survival of the fittest. So they're going through evolution. Are we? Okay, so that brings us to competition. If there's too many of us and not enough resources, we are going to compete, and only the most fit, will survive. So you notice, again, I'm not saying the strongest will survive. Maybe the smartest, the most clever will survive, or maybe the one with the right fur color so it blends in, so it doesn't get attacked by predators. Maybe they'll survive. So it's really just who has the best traits to fit in, or maybe it's even the one that'll attract a mate the best so that it can reproduce. So you have to have competition for food, shelter, and opportunities to reproduce in order to have evolution, to have survival of the fittest. You can only have the most fit survive if you have too many people or too many bunnies and they are competing. All right, the next thing is you have to have some variation. If all the bunnies were born the same, how would really any be more fit than the other? So you have to have maybe like different colors, like in this picture, and maybe like this one doesn't blend in very well. Although if that one were born in the Arctic, it would survive, and that's why Arctic rabbits are so white. So maybe like a lot of the bunnies around here are this color, maybe that color blends in the best with the trees, so then they end up surviving the best. You will not find white rabbits in the wild around here very often because they are so vulnerable. They stand out, so they do not survive. This is a bunny that was born without ears, so that's probably not an advantage. So it's probably not going to survive without humans helping it. So anyways, you have to have some variation. Some have to be better than others, fitter than others, better color than others, stronger than others, smarter than others, in order to have like a survival of the fittest, so that only the fittest survive. And now we're kind of evolving towards whatever that rabbit is. So you got to have too many rabbits, you got to have competition between the rabbits, and you got to have variation. Just a chance to mention, using selective breeding, we can choose characteristics that would not survive in nature and have them flourish in captivity. So maybe we think white rabbits are really cute. So when we find one, we get it together with another white rabbit and we make a whole bunch of white rabbits and we protect them, we feed them, we shelter them, and then they are able to survive, but only in captivity. Okay, so fourth thing you need for evolution and survival of the fittest is those fittest. They need to not only survive, but they need to survive long enough to reproduce. Okay, so that their genes can be passed on. So even if they have some trait that makes them really great, if they can't reproduce, it doesn't matter. So we got to have too many bunnies. They got to be competing. Some have to be more fit than others, and they have to be fit enough to live long enough to reproduce. So that can bring us to, there's a disease like Huntington's disease where people die at like age 40. It's a genetic disease. So you're like, well, if they die, why does it keep getting passed on genetically? And the reason is when you're 40, you've lived long enough to reproduce. So those people with Huntington's disease, they live long enough to reproduce, to pass on their genes, and then they die. So for this survival of the fittest to happen, you only have to live long enough to pass on your genes and reproduce. And then the last part is we need those characteristics to be passed on to the next generation. So you have to have like genetic things that make you stronger that you can pass on to your offspring so that they then have those favorable characteristics and survive. So 5 things for survival of the, oh no, wait, there's a 6th. So what is like evolution of new species? When that keeps happening, like there's these hares like in Australia that have these really big, strong legs and huge ears. So maybe there's also this little tiny pika and there's a rabbit. So when a lot of these favorable traits, like maybe it was really tough and rugged in the outback of Australia, and only rabbits with really long ears to hear things and really strong legs to run fast could survive. So you started to have like this new species. So it wasn't like all rabbits in the world became like huge ears and strong legs. They started to kind of form their own little species, and that's where you can have the evolution of a new species. Like here in North America, these traits are fine and those are going to stay rabbits. But in Australia, or I don't know, somewhere else, only the long ears and the strong legs survive. So you start to have like 2 different species, and that's called like speciation or evolution of a new species, when a bunch of traits like accumulate over time and you start to have like a totally different thing. So this is an example of things that are slightly different, but if with more time you could have something go from like monkeys becoming monkeys or humans, so they could become like really different over time. So here's an example. Probably all these 3, the Arctic hare, the jackrabbit, and the eastern cottontail, all started out the same. But in where we live, the eastern cottontail, that coloring really blends in nicely here. And they didn't really need a lot more to survive. Jackrabbits live in a harsher environment, so they needed the big ears and the long legs. So that they kind of evolved into their own species. And then the Arctic hare is obviously white, and that was so that it could camouflage in with the snow. So in their part of the world, they developed those features. So we ended up not just evolving as a species, but evolving into like separate, becoming so different from each other that you develop like 2 or 3 different species of a similar animal. Here's an example of just one individual species, not splitting into different species like a giraffe. It's not like different types of giraffes, but just like how they got their long necks is, so maybe there was this really high vegetation, and only what happened here, only the ones with the longest necks survive. The short necks ones don't survive. So then the long neck ones breed and they have more long neck babies, and only the longest necks of those guys survive because they can reach this high vegetation, and then they get together, reproduce, and make more long neck babies, and the longest necks survive, and so on. And so maybe this thing started out, maybe it used to look like this. Maybe it was like a donkey or something, and just kind of like horse-like, right? And just the one, a couple were born with long necks. Maybe everybody laughed at them, said, "Oh, you look weird," and they survived better, had long neck babies, and so on and so on. So it's like how you can develop a new species because that trait helped them to survive, and then they reproduce and have more of that trait in their babies. So again, this all happened because giraffes showed variation in height. If you never had like those new long necks appear, then you wouldn't have survival of the fittest where the longest necks survive, and you wouldn't start to like develop those longer necks over time. And just a reminder that the individuals had no control over this. They didn't say, "Hey, it would be really helpful if I had a longer neck." You can't make it happen yourself. It was just that some were born with a little, maybe even a mutation, a weird trait where they had a longer neck. They survived, they passed on their genes. All right, so just to conclude, 5 things you need for evolution, survival of the fittest to happen. You got to be able to pass on your traits. You have to live long enough to do that, to reproduce. You have to have some variation so that there is one that's more fit than the others. You have to have competition so that not everybody survives, then you won't have survival of the fittest. So to have competition, you have to have overproduction, so there's too many, so you do have that competition.